On November 18, 1978, law enforcement officers from Guyana and American military troops headed deep into the thick jungle of northern Guyana. They were searching for Jim Jones, an American cult leader who had moved his group to this remote area 4 years before. Jones and his people had built a huge settlement in the heart of this jungle, creating what they called Jonestown. Getting there meant hiking through thick plants, towering trees reaching 100 feet high, and walking on muddy, slippery ground. But the difficult journey wasn't the real threat facing this team. Jim Jones probably knew they were coming to arrest him, which meant the officers and soldiers might face armed followers ready to fight back. When they finally arrived at Jonestown, though, everything was strangely silent. Walking through the entrance, they found something that looked like a nightmare come to life. The whole town was deserted, except for the main meeting area in the center. Around this building lay the bodies of hundreds of people, including many young children. Officials counted approximately 900 dead, making this the worst single-day loss of American civilian lives in a planned attack up to that time in our country's history. At first, people thought this was clearly a case of mass suicide. But the truth turned out to be much more terrible than anyone first realized. Jim Jones had started his cult as a regular church back in America. But when it grew bigger and more well-known, newspapers and government officials began criticizing him for supporting communist countries like Soviet Russia. So, in 1974, he decided to move far into Guyana's rainforest to get away from all the attention. Many of his most devoted followers came with him. He told them this new place would be like paradise on earth, where they could all live peacefully without any problems.
These are potato chips made from plantain, and they're more delicious. They're a combination of a potato chip and a French fry. And radishes, You don't know what you're missing down here? They make their own buns and hamburgers and the leafy green vegetables. By the way, we just won first prize from the national government of Guyana for our leafy green vegetables. Here are the people at the table eating an afternoon snack. You see Pepsi-Colas here, 3 cents, American money. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it? I can't get anybody to go home with me.
But actually living in Jonestown was far from peaceful. Everyone had to work 12 hours every single day for 6 days each week. There was no way for anyone to escape these horrible conditions. Jim Jones had already made a deal with Guyana's government that made it almost impossible for his followers to get visas to return to America. Besides that, the entire compound was surrounded by a fence, and armed guards walked around the outside to catch anyone trying to run away. As time passed, family members of cult members still living in America kept asking the government to bring their loved ones back home. So in November 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan and 17 other people, including news reporters, traveled to Guyana to investigate what was really happening at Jonestown. They arrived at the compound on November 17th and started their investigation. They walked around, talked to people, and did everything they could to learn the truth about Jonestown. Surprisingly, everything seemed as happy and carefree as Jim Jones had shown in his promotional videos. It came out later that Jim had actually practiced with his followers on how to convince Leo's team that everyone was happy and doing well. But the truth couldn't stay hidden for long. That night, 2 members named Vernon and Monica secretly gave the delegation a worrying note that said, "Dear Congressman, Vernon Gosney and Monica Bagby, please help us get out of Jonestown." This made the delegation members ask other people if they also wanted to leave. 9 more cult members found the courage to speak up. This even included one of Jim's closest assistants, which showed just how terrible the living conditions in Jonestown really were. The next morning, Leo's group took these people to the nearby Kaituma airstrip so they could fly back home. But just as they were getting on the planes, Jim's armed men drove up in a truck and started shooting, killing 4 people, including Congressman Leo Ryan himself. Back at Jonestown, Jim gathered all the members at the central meeting area and told them to drink poisoned grape-flavored drink mix. He said this was the only way to escape the American government.
They go back, you won't leave us alone. You're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive.
In the end, while many brainwashed cult members believed Jim and drank the poisoned drink willingly, others, including children, were forced to drink it while people pointed guns at them. Some were even given cyanide shots or shot dead on the spot. The American military headed to Jonestown as soon as they heard about the shooting at the airstrip. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived, it was too late. The massive scale of this tragedy, combined with the fact that many victims were forced into it, made it the most horrifying scene those soldiers or anyone else has ever discovered in a forest. On April 4th, 1922, a mechanic named Albert Hofner went to visit the Gruber family house located near a forest in Hinterkaifeck, Germany. The family had hired him to fix their barn motor a few weeks earlier. But when he got to the house, he noticed something odd. The cows and dogs in the barn were making lots of noise, but the rest of the house was completely quiet. He tried knocking on the door and calling out to them many times, but nobody answered. Thinking they weren't home, he waited in their yard for an hour before deciding to leave. But just as he was about to go, he saw that the door to the motor room was open. So he decided to fix the motor anyway and come back for his payment later. After finishing the repairs, Albert wanted to tell one of their neighbors about his work. But the house was completely isolated, with the nearest neighbor living over half a kilometer away. With no other choice, he walked the extra distance and knocked on the door of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the Gruber family's closest neighbor. Lorenz, however, thought the empty house was very suspicious. He knew the family well and figured they would have told him if they were going somewhere. So later that evening, he joined two of his neighbors to go check things out for themselves. Sure enough, the house was just as empty as Albert had said. While they were looking around the house, one of them noticed that the door to the machine area was also open. The three men entered through this door. After checking the machine room, they decided to look further by breaking open the barn door connected to it. But the horrible sight they saw on the other side of that door probably stayed with them for the rest of their lives. At first, things looked normal, but then one of them spotted what looked like a human foot sticking out from a pile of hay. This turned out to be the body of 72-year-old Kazelia, the main woman of the house. As they got closer, they also found 3 more bodies, scattered around the barn. These included the head of the house, 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, and his 2 daughters. Things became even more gruesome when they discovered the body of Andreas's 2-year-old grandson, Josef, in his baby carriage with his skull smashed in, as well as the family maid Maria, in a different room. Someone had murdered the entire Gruber family and gotten away without being caught. Later investigations showed that the family was killed 4 days earlier on April 1st. But what made this already horrible crime even more frightening was that it was carried out over several hours. The killer probably spent a long time in the house afterward, trying to hide the evidence by covering bodies with hay and blankets. The room with the maid even had clothes stuffed into its window frame to make spotting her from outside more difficult. Most people assumed this was the result of a robbery that went wrong. However, most valuable items were still in the house, which made the case even more confusing. Neighbors said that the family had seen men watching their home from the woods on multiple occasions. Their previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming the house was haunted, and someone had broken into the machine room a few days before the killings. None of these clues helped investigators find the killer. And since the home was so isolated, there were no witnesses. To this day, the Gruber family murders remain an unsolved mystery. In July 2015, Marc-Andre was marking trees in the thick Arcata Community Forest in California. He worked as Arcata's Environmental Services Director and was doing a routine inspection when something strange caught his attention. Just off the hiking trail, Mark noticed an unusual structure poking through the plants. He got closer and was shocked to find a cabin in the middle of the forest. What made this discovery even more strange was the fact that this wasn't a quickly built shack. It was surprisingly well constructed with a solid concrete block base, plastic sheets to keep things dry, and even a lock on the front door. Someone had clearly spent weeks, if not months, building it from scratch. Mark immediately told the park rangers, who spent the next few days watching near the cabin to see if the owner would return. They eventually broke the lock to see if they could find any clues about who lived there, but this only left them even more confused. Inside, they found everything someone would need to survive in the middle of nowhere. Fresh water, a wood-burning stove, canned food, and even books stacked neatly on the shelves. It looked more like a cramped studio apartment than a makeshift cabin. Yet none of the items inside provided any clues about the owner's identity. Since no one had returned after several days, rangers assumed the cabin had been abandoned. They followed proper procedures and left an eviction notice on the front door before leaving the site. But when Mark and the Rangers returned to tear it down, they made an even more shocking discovery. The entire cabin had disappeared without a trace. There wasn't even a single nail left behind. In its place was the international symbol of a squatter drawn in charcoal. This raised more questions than it answered. How did the cabin's residents always manage to be away whenever the Rangers visited? And more importantly, why were they hiding in the middle of a forest in the first place? It's possible this person was a criminal on the run, but even after a decade, no one knows the real answer. In May 2016, a hiker was walking through a forest in Harlan, Kentucky. About halfway through his trip, he discovered a trail camera lying on the forest floor. Trail cameras are typically used to capture wildlife footage, but this particular camera didn't have any storage device or a battery. Assuming it was abandoned, the hiker took it home and gave it to a friend to see if it could be fixed. What neither of them knew was that this camera was actually a trap set by a crazy person. As soon as the friend connected a battery to it, the camera exploded. The blast was powerful enough to blow off some of the man's fingers and injure his stomach. The device had been rigged to explode the moment it received power. After being told about the incident, authorities swept the area where the camera was found and discovered another trail camera with similar modifications, but it didn't contain anything that could help identify who placed it there. While checking local neighborhoods, investigators finally caught a break. 2 different people reported hearing an explosion at a neighbor's house several months earlier. That neighbor was 39-year-old Mark. When authorities searched his home, they found buckets filled with bomb-making materials and a handwritten note that read, "Broken camera for a broken soul." He was arrested on June 21, 2016. But before he could be officially charged, the police wanted his help finding other explosive cameras he may have left behind. During this trip, Sexton tried to grab an officer's gun, likely in an attempt to escape. In the struggle, he was accidentally shot and killed. Before his death, he helped the police find 12 more rigged cameras hidden throughout the Harlan forest, but it's entirely possible that many others are still out there, waiting to be discovered by an unsuspecting passerby. On November 10, 1985, a hunter was walking through the dense woods of Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. He'd used this route many times before, but this time, something unusual caught his eye. Hidden beneath a pile of leaves and debris was a rusted 55-gallon metal drum. Curious, he walked closer only to discover the chopped-up remains of 2 people inside. Authorities were called immediately. Later investigation revealed the victims were a young woman and a young girl. Both had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head, then cut into pieces and stuffed into the barrel. Sadly, both bodies were too damaged to identify. With no leads, the case went cold until the year 2000. A state trooper was revisiting the area where the first barrel was found, hoping to uncover new clues. But instead, he came across something far worse. Another identical 55-gallon barrel just 150 yards from the first one. Inside were the remains of 2 more young girls, both between 1 and 4 years old. They had been killed in the same brutal way, blunt force trauma, then dismembered. The discovery confirmed that all 4 murders were the work of the same person. But even with this new evidence, the case remained unsolved for another 14 years. Finally, thanks to advanced DNA testing, 3 of the 4 victims were identified. The adult woman was 24-year-old Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch. The 2 children were her daughters, 6-year-old Marie Vaughn and 11-month-old Sarah McWaters. This identification helped narrow the investigation, but didn't immediately reveal the killer. Eventually, DNA tests pointed to a man named Terry Peter Rasmussen.
And you're not a doctor. And both stories have their footage. Maybe she hurt herself, and you're concerned about that getting out, but she's harmed herself. No. If you're thinking, is she suicidal? Yes.
Unknown to the authorities at the time, Rasmussen had already been arrested for the 2002 murder of his wife. He was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2010, long before anyone linked him to the Bear Brook murders. Although the case is technically solved, many questions remain unanswered. And with the killer no longer alive to face justice, the story remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved tragedies ever uncovered in a forest.